practical things. Yes, so what are we here to do? First of all, have a look at what has been developed for now. So the draft of the data model for IOP interoperability assessments will be presented in just a bit. But of course, this is a draft, and we really look forward to your input and your use cases for how you plan to use interoperability assessment in your organizations. And that's why we really want to see how interested you are to contribute to this model, because we really need more use cases, more applications of the model to be sure that what we have now is suitable and fit for purpose. And then we'll also have a look at the timeline later on, and yeah, where we want to land with this model. Then on the for those who are not familiar, Emile and I both work for the CEMIC action in the interoperability unit. And what CEMIC does is really we try to promote reuse of semantic assets. And well, in some cases, we also develop these semantic assets like we do with the very basic models. So yeah, what we really want to do is reach agreement among the member states and the Commission on those things where it involves data models that are needed for the delivery of cross-border public services. I won't put too much emphasis. I mean, most of you will know what we do, but I think the most important part here is the last point on the slide, and that is we do all of this by a consensus model. And this is also important when you bring your use cases later on. We'll put the link to the GitHub where the data model is being developed in the chat in a second. And we really invite you to create issues on GitHub. And then later on in future webinars, we can then vote on if there are conflicting interests. We go through this voting process. But Emile will go more in depth on how we reach consensus later on in the presentation. But I think it was important just to highlight this at this point as well.
Yeah, indeed. So to highlight, CEMIC also stands for Semantic Interoperability Community, and that's why consensus is important to us. It's really a community action. It's not a top-down action. We're all in this together, let's say. So that brings us to actually going into the content for today. Before we actually dive into the model, the draft model, what we have and what we are looking for, we just want to briefly touch on the context under which it was born. You probably all know the context a bit, but I wanted to go over them to at least create a level playing field for us all. So why do we want to create this common model? It's because of the Interoperable Europe Act, as you might all suspect. So in Article 3, there's really the focus that the Commission shall provide tools to support your interoperability assessments, which includes online tools to facilitate its completion and its publication. We see this data model as one of those aspects that will support publication. But as you will see later on, it indirectly also supports the completion of the reporting. Then in addition, under Article 8, the member states and the Commission are all required to publish their interoperability assessments. So we see this data model as a way to do that. But then the Article 8 also under point 4 lays out that the Commission and the member states need to undertake appropriate action to ensure interoperability with the Interoperable Europe portal. So this data model, if it is applied in your national portal, and it's implied at the European level, it's easier to create that interoperability between those two portals when it comes to the interoperability assessments, of course, because the portal is a bit broader than only the interoperability assessments. They also touch on solutions and everything you can find there today already. Also on data about the sandboxes that should all be found eventually on the portal, and most of it is already present. Then what is very important if we're making a data model is to know what needs to be contained in the data model. So for that, we look again at the legislation as a starting point. First of all, the format which the data model will take. The Act lays out that it needs to be done in a machine-readable format. It needs to be able to be published on an official website, and that report shall then be shared electronically with the Interoperable Europe Board. For all these reasons and the need to be interoperable, we chose to go with linked data, which is a common approach we take under the CEMIC action. But on those technical aspects, we will not focus today or even during the development cycle. We will mainly focus on the semantics. What is the meaning behind the data model? So what is actually in it is mainly identified by the Interoperable Europe Act's annex, which touches on we need general information, we have a set of requirements, and we also want the results to be published. So now I will go into the model, and we will go over these points and how the model proposes to approach them. But before we do that, we wanted to link back again to what I mentioned before, where there is support that shall be provided by the Commission. So main form of support is through the portal, the Interoperable Europe portal. The portal will provide, but already does, provide a form which allows you to fill in your interoperability assessments and directly publish on the portal. So that's really, it helps you complete the assessment, but it also helps you publish it. Of course, this is manual through a form. The aim is to have this data model in place to also allow it through an API call. So that you can programmatically do it, that you don't need the manual interaction if you don't want to. And then the data model supports these both actions, and to make sure that everything that's documented in the form is also documented through the API, and that the data set created by both entry points are compatible with each other, but also just equivalent. This is a brief look. If you haven't been exposed to it yet, this is how the assessment form looks on the portal. As you can see, what is mentioned in the annex comes back here. General information, binding requirements, the results, some supporting documentation, and then there is the option to have a review process. And then your assessment is complete and can be published. So the model, where does the need, what is the process of its creation? Where does the data come from? Originally, it comes from an author who is working on policy. This can be policy of any matter. That can be drafting legislation. This can be procurement guidelines. Anything that can affect interoperability is in scope, as long as it's a binding requirement that we are talking about. So an author creates a binding requirement in any of the relevant policy-making areas. And this binding requirement triggers an assessment. Then through this assessment, we try to really capture all information that is relevant and group it together. So we need to know which public sector entity is providing this report, but also this assessment, but also who is affected. We need to know the wider initiative of the project. This way, when you're exploring the data, if you know the wider initiative, you can also see from that initiative point of view, what are all the binding requirements. We need to connect it to public services. So which public service is affected, which public service is a cross-border public service. We look into what are the private stakeholders, the public stakeholders. So this barrier, this binding requirement, who does it affect? Citizen, businesses, public organizations, who needs to interact? Then we need to really explicitly state what are the effects on cross-border interoperability. So really, what is now the outcome? What are we talking about? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it indeterminate? Just this label is important, but also, yes, but what does it really mean? Give us a brief explanation of what is the effect. From those effects, we can identify some barriers. So what is blocking interoperability? Is this blocking interoperability? Is it blocked by anything else? And finally, we want to connect to solutions, common solutions. Why is this important? It means when you're doing this assessment during design time and you're forced to, or you want to connect it to a solution, you already look what's out there. So that means that your drafting stage, you already get exposed to the tools, and that allows you to tailor your legislation, your policy to tools available. We hope that this encourages also technical interoperability just by being exposed. And this is the current draft data model. As you can see, it's not very extensive, but it's also not empty. At the center of it, as a very important entry point, because that's where everything originates, we have the binding requirement. And the binding requirement, it references some resources. What is affected. So we kept that general under the get resource. But it is also related to an FRBR expression. What do we see under FRBR expression? It's really the initiative or the legal text from which this binding requirement originates. Then binding requirements can directly already reference interoperability solutions. Interoperability solutions we chose to model in the same way as on the Interoperable Europe portal to allow for the better integration and compatibility. So that's through an asset. Asset is a very vague and broad term on purpose, because what is an interoperability solution? It can really range from a standard to a methodology, a best practice. They can all be considered as solutions according to the Act as well. Then we can see that it's also connected to public services, to participants. Then through the assessment, we can see a statement. The statement will really give the value. Is it positive for interoperability? Is it negative for interoperability? And what is the actual effect on interoperability? So that's a brief overview of the data model. Now we'll dive a bit into it, but with a more focused approach. This is again an overview mapped to what is mentioned in the annex. So general information, we need the entity or public sector body. Okay, that is captured in the model. We need the initiative, project, or action concerned, that we model with expression. We need a link to previous assessments. So that's pointing again to an assessment. This is very important because this will allow people that are analyzing what is published to see how during the drafting process interoperability changed. What are the effects of those changes we applied? Are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving in the wrong direction? Are we creating more or less interoperability by the changes we are introducing? So you can, over the time, really get a picture of what's going on. Then to describe the binding requirements, there is the public services concerned, there is the requirement itself, there is participation. So participation here is the private and the public stakeholders that are affected and that can play a role. Finally, we also touch on the effects of those binding requirements, which will come back again in our results step, where the effects can correspond to barriers. It can either be a barrier itself, if it was negative, or it can reference a barrier that it's overcoming. Then we have the reference to solutions, which are either hosted on the portal or not hosted on the portal. One of the aims that we're having, we currently have, yes, Sander?
Maybe now is a good time just to check if everybody's actually following and if the model is a bit understood, because I know, at least for me, it wasn't so obvious at first, but then I mean, if it's all clear, fine. But if not, I mean, please do ask questions, because it might not be, and probably it's a good time to stop now and then answer the questions on the model. Just, I see that there is a hand raised.
Michael?
Hello, everybody. So for me, so far, it's very clear, and I think it's a very good approach. One concern I have is that when I see, for example, binding requirements assessed, there is a clear reference to the legal reference. So we got we could have unique identifier for the legal reference, like ELI number, European identification number. I would like to support the idea that for any other possible objects, we have also unique identifiers, especially for public organizations, referring to the reference data for identifying public organizations within member states, as well for linked to use assessments, the unique identifier for assessment, etc. So this is my only suggestion so far. Thank you.
That's a suggestion I welcome greatly, because if we want to have this data set be useful in the future, we need those unique identifiers to not create any confusion, and that everything can be addressed in a concrete manner. If I'm referencing an assessment and somebody else is referencing the assessment, we need those unique identifiers, not only that we are pointing in the right direction, but also that everybody knows that we're pointing in the same direction. So I really like this input, Michael, and it's something we're going to take with us in the development. Is there anybody else who has any first thoughts or comments they want to leave for us to think about? You can ask questions here that we might not be able to answer directly, but it's food for thought. As you will see later, we're planning on doing a development cycle, and just sparking a conversation is already a good start of updating a model. So please, anybody, feel free. Okay, I will now. Yes, Michael.
More because you are asking for input, so I will provide some. Before you presented the business model for the assessments, maybe it's a good idea to use also to make add some details, like from the perspective of the domain model, showing the not only the relationship, but the direction of the relationship, type of relationship between several of the objects presented. Just for clarification, deep diving.
Yeah, we will aim to add that after the call, to make sure that if you're looking at this documentation after the call, that you have that context that Michael is referring to, and so that everybody is talking about the same matters. So I will now continue, but please do raise your hand if you want to intervene. I get a notification if somebody raises a hand. It is no problem. That's why we're here, to really talk to each other. Otherwise, this could have been a recording, of course. So I will continue here. What we want to touch on is there is a form existent now on the portal that is already being used. So one of our aims is to not impact this form too much. Of course, we might impact it if we apply any changes, but the aim is that the data we've already collected is still usable. And this does not mean we cannot introduce new aspects, of course. What it mainly means is that we're not too destructive. Let's make sure that we still capture those same elements. We can, of course, expand. We can create more relations. We can capture other properties. That is no issue. So here, the form starts with getting your information. It is is a public sector body you work for? Who are you representing when you fill this in? What country, and what is the name of the organization? So those are very basic questions. Currently, they are open text fields, but there is we would like, if that is something that interests you, to explore whether we can focus here more on code lists. So yes, for country, of course, we have the code lists that are present by OP. The type of public sector body, there we do have existing code lists, but we want your view. Is somebody missing? Is there a kind of public sector body that's not part of that code list that's still important? So this is something that I'm expecting you cannot answer on the spot. That's why I didn't display the full code list. This is something for you to take home when you look at this model and to provide some feedback. I think you're missing this, we're missing that. So that would be very interesting. So it's connected to a class we have from the core vocabularies, which is a core artifact created by the SEMIC action. It has a definition, it has a name, it has a body, public sector body type and a country. So there's really that match. Here in this diagram, I only display the necessary elements. If you go take a look out of curiosity at the core vocabularies, you will see that it has multiple fields, more fields. You can always ask the question to yourself, okay, this field, it is not explicitly included in this model, but maybe it would be interesting for inclusion. So these are the kind of aspects we would invite you to look at. And as you can see, this is also what is requested from the legal text. Then we continue on to the initiative. So how will we describe and judge the initiative? So first of all, we're looking for the name. What is this thing called? As Michael just highlighted here, it would be useful if we could make sure to use, in addition to a descriptive name for the reading's sake, we could add a unique identifier. If we can add it here, but also before to your public organization, that will allow way more analytics to be automatically applied afterwards if you're interested in such actions. That could replace or could be in addition to having a link to the initiative. So if we ask, can you give us the identifier? We might run here into the issue that not everybody is exposed to that identifier at this stage. Who's filling this out? Are they aware of such matters? And because this is the European portal, it is difficult to include all identifiers from all member states. So here we will need some bridging action to be undertaken to really make sure that it's used in the correct manner. And then there is, of course, a question. Can it be linked to a previous assessment? If you click yes, you will be then able to provide the information around that previous assessment. Then we continue in the questionnaire where we're really focusing on, okay, what are the public services concerned? What are we talking about exactly? Because in the form you can give multiple binding requirements, you can first select here which binding requirement are you talking about that you just provided. So this is really a reference to what you've provided, what are we talking about. And then for now, for the public services, they are sorted into categories. We didn't go into the level of this exact public service. We kept it to categories. Why? It's because, again, we're looking here from the European level, but it would be very interesting for us, and I think for everyone, that when we are self-populating this data in our own systems and then providing it through an API, to be more specific here, then we can really point at a group of public services in our country that have an identifier, like providing an identity card. Maybe you have an instance for that in every city, because every city slightly executes it differently, but you could still group them and provide the identifier for the provision of identity cards. This can then happen through the public service class, which also originates from another SEMIC core vocabulary. And it would cover the needs coming from the annex and the act to identify what cross-border public service is affected. by using CPSV here, we are looking to the future a bit. So we as CEMIC would really like that the dataset collected here could be integrated or connected to a catalog of service. Catalog of service is what we as CEMIC recommend to be described using CPSV AP, which is the application profile tailored to that. And various countries have a database. It's a sort of database, a registry of all the public services that can be provided in their country. If this already exists, that means you already have that unique identifier, and integrating these two data sets will allow us to create more insights. Then we now continue on to identifying the binding requirements. So as I mentioned before, in the form you can fill in multiple binding requirements. So we'll have to number them. We want to provide a legal reference. Currently in the form, we left this quite open. We're just saying provide a yes. I see Michael asked a question about the previous slide. This is currently a placeholder. So as I understood, the more than 5 really gave us just a number to have a cutoff on. This is, we can discuss that cutoff, of course, and it's to see how widely ranging the impact is. Are we talking a one-to-one communication? Belgium with the Netherlands or with Luxembourg, or are we really talking a whole block of countries, a network, let's say? So that's the thought behind it. Where we draw the line between 5 and 6, that can be discussed. We can also even discuss, no, we don't want to broadly categorize. We really want the exact number. Of course, then that opens the discussion. What if you don't have a full view on what the number is? So these are all discussions we want to engage you on. And it's fantastic to see, Michael, that you already identified that this needs to be further discussed. Everybody else, also feel free. There is a chat. You can raise your hands. This is an interactive session. So for binding requirements, this is more a novel concept, and therefore we made a new class. So this class, we can fully tailor it to what we are looking for. For now, the fields that are in there are just to meet the legal requirements. If we take the view here again of adding a unique identifier, what is the advantage of adding a unique identifier to binding requirements? It's if you are doing something in the future and your new requirement is super similar to a previous one, you can really point to it. You can say, this and this and this is the effect. How do I know this? Because I saw it in that requirement that we had provided before, which is of a similar nature. So here we're now shifting to stakeholders. Again, here we kept it broad. We made categories of stakeholders. So to what group is it relevant? So a local public sector body, regional, national, European institution, agencies, body, or even private businesses. And then for each of the stakeholders, you can say, oh, what country are we talking about? We're not affecting everybody equally. Who are we affecting? That's the idea behind this. Again, this is an example code list, can be expanded after discussion. I see Hendrik Schmidt has a question. If a new regulation were to concern provision of IDs for all other EU citizens, would the number of concerned services be 1 or 1 for each country? So 27. That goes back to something we really want to touch upon is here, public service, is do we want to force everyone to identify exactly each public service, which would result in 27, or would we group them together? We would say we call a grouping of public services, and we might give it the name, for example, providing ID to foreign citizens, foreign EU citizens. An example, very broad, but yeah. So it's not defined at this stage. At this stage, what is defined is just the category. And then finally, we come to the meat of the business, and that's a statement on interoperability. Is it beneficial, negligible, or risky to interoperability? And then also, if you choose one of those, please explain. What do you mean? What are we talking about? So this is also again an open text field, how we will explore to make this more structured. That's one of those topics we are looking for. And then we go to the next step in the form, which is about linking it to existing solutions. So this is where I mentioned, if we at drafting stage look at solutions, we might already get exposed to what's out there. We can tailor our policy to fit with open source solutions that are shared on the portal, solutions we can trust. So this is also a benefit for that. But what you can also do is you can reference solutions nationally and help them get exposure to other institutions in your country, but other institutions in other countries. Really linking these solutions here, it's also a way of gauging adoption rates. Because if you see, oh, this in this country all reference this solution, it's used in those different contexts. Oh, wow, that must mean it is very compatible with other solutions. So that's all the kind of conversation we want to spark about connecting solutions to your assessment. As you can see, we divided it up into solutions in the portal. Solutions in the portal, they are very easy, between brackets, of course, to integrate within this form, because the form is also hosted on the portal. So you can really point to an exact solution as it's hosted on the portal. If it's not hosted on the Interoperable Europe portal, you can also reference it using the URL under which it's published. And then there is the open question fields. Have you identified any remaining borders of cross-border barriers to cross-border interoperability? So it's really, okay, while I was doing this assessment for this policy, we have touched on this and this element, but I noticed another issue. We are not touching on it directly with our policy, but we still saw it. And this could be a way that you report it so that it comes on the top of everybody, on the top of concerns for everybody. Everybody sees that this issue exists, and other actions might then be confronted with it. Oh, yes, this is relevant to us. And that allows them to already act on it even before they themselves perform the assessment. So that's where we are looking to have more proactive policy making. And that is our walk through the form and its connection with the data model as it stands now. So I'm here back again on this data model. What I do, if you're looking at this data model, I want you to note you see cardinality. So that means how many of each is present. But that's really a placeholder now. And each and every cardinality really needs to be analyzed and discussed as a community. Yeah, so Hendrik, very good question. I'm living in a dream future when I say we can gauge the adoption. So that's what I envisage with that is if all these reports are published on a similar or compatible platform, we can just, through a query or an analysis, ask the system, how many times is the solution referenced? And so, yes, it's not in there natively, but it's something I want to move to, or we could move to if you see an interest in it. I seem to have some issues on sharing, so I will stop share and reshare. Please do, in the meantime, keep the questions coming in the chat. They're always helpful. I can talk a lot, but if we can talk about things that concern you, and that is more relevant, of course.
I think, Sander, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I replied in the chat to Mika's statement about the identifier of the public service that has a local code. Since we're in the model, we are merely referencing the CPS VAP class of public service. So within the model itself, we don't want to go too much into the business of describing public services as such, but we kind of want to have the discussion on the public service description in the CPS VAP model. But I just wanted to note that the public service class in CPS VAP has a property to point to an external identifier, so that even if it's another URI in RDF, you can still point to local identifiers to kind of keep track of things. And then, yes, I think you already addressed the divide a bit, that from 1 to 5 and 6, the division. I mean, that it's a bit arbitrary at the moment. I mean, but yes, it's something that is also not really. It's not part of the model as such. It's part of the form, and yes, we can have the discussion rather on the model than on the form at the moment.
But why we still included it in the slides was to spark a conversation also on, do you want to capture this kind of things in the model as well? If you're reporting through an API, is this something you want to touch on? Is this not something you want to touch on? These are all questions. As you see, I'm promoting questions. I am not at this during this venture, during this webinar. We want you to ask questions, but we also want you to try answer somebody else's question. So really, if you're from Germany and you say, how would this work? Then somebody who has already implemented in another country can reply. And that way we are also sharing internally our best practices. Because if we ask questions and we as Digit are the only one answering, we might come to solutions that are not compatible with solutions you already have in place. So we are looking for your needs, but also for solutions you might already have. Because if you have a solution, why not let us adopt it and promote it over the union? Because if it already works, why would we reinvent the wheel? So that brings me to next steps, because I saw somebody mention the development timeline for the API. I will first touch on the steps that come before it, but it is part of the presentation. So this is really on a high level. What does SAMIC normally do to create and maintain specifications? And we're going to try to apply this to this situation we're in now, to really tailor in this community-driven manner a data model. So what initiates the SAMIC to either do a maintenance cycle or even create a specification? It's an initial need. So either a member state or the commission identifies a need which stems from something that affects all member states, from something that goes wider than, oh, we have this national issue. Of course, I think the Interoperable Europe Act, it qualifies. It touches us all. We all have requirements coming from this. And since we want interoperability, it would be nice to have interoperability on the aspects that are mandated by the Act that talks about interoperability. That's the fun behind it, in my eyes. So that initial need, yes, we got it. Then we go to dialogue. We really want, if we're going to make a model, we don't want to solve just one issue. Because if we want to solve just one issue, we take the legal text, we extract the exact mandated requirements, and then we stop. Because you're able to be compliant. No, we want to open dialogue because we want to make something useful. We want to connect to other initiatives you have. We want to make sure that's compatible with what's already in place. So that's where we open dialogue. We need to see, what are your needs? What do you see as a useful outcome of doing this report? Is there something that you can do with this report that we haven't looked at, but that needs to be considered while making the model? That is a very important thing to consider. So here, this dialogue is very important. Today, that's the first step to opening dialogue. Today, we're going through all this so that you can already think about it. And then we will ask you to provide input online, but also in further calls. And this one is less interactive. We are aiming to the following calls to really spark discussion, make concrete decisions. And that means that everybody will have to speak up, say their mind, so that we make sure that everything is covered. That will then result in us editing the model and then sharing it with the community for a public review. So here, again, you as a community member play a very important role. Okay, we have made discussions. We have done that online. We voted on things. Okay, but that's good and all. Was this actually incorporated into the data model? That's the question you need to ask at step 4. Is really go over, I shared my needs. Everybody agreed that this need is important, but I don't see it represented in the model. I don't see how the model is compatible with what we discussed. That's really what needs to happen in that step 4. And then depending on how advanced we are, we can say, voila, this model is ready for development. Or we have to say, we need to do step 5, we need to repeat. Meaning in the public review, we identified new needs, maybe even other things that need to be covered, or the approach that we're taking, it doesn't pass public review. So we have to, again, go through the process, open dialogue, identify needs, edit the model, start the public review. Now in practice, in this context, we are in step 2. So we are looking at the initial use cases. The initial use cases, as populated on this slide, it's really broad, and it also focuses initially on what does the Act require us to do. So that is a very dry use case. It is, let's meet some legal requirements and then don't care about it anymore. That's not what we want. That's why we added more use cases and want you to add more use cases. So what are the use cases? As they stand now, it's publish it in a machine-readable way, ensure there is some level of interoperability between national and European portals, and it is for the portal, allowing the portal to store and host those models. That's what we need to do. What are some fun things that you might be able to do that we've been thinking about is when you're filling in these forms and you have a database of previous assessments with binding requirements, if you're introducing a new one, does it conflict with an existing one? That might be something you're investigating. This might not be able to be done automatically. That's why you need to also have some systems on top. But what we are looking for in this data model is to make sure we capture the necessary information to support those systems. Also, as I referenced before, when you're filling in an assessment with binding requirements that are similar or just an adjustment of previous requirements, you want to be able to see this. You want to be able to just reuse that as much as possible. We don't want people to just fill in forms for the sake of filling in forms, to provide data for the sake of data. No, we want it to be intelligent. So that means if this data was already provided once, let's just reference and reuse it. So now I want to open the floor to you. What are your potential use cases? What do you see can be useful with this type of data? Where are you planning on going? And what would you like to see? Sander, because I'm in a different presenting mode, could you address people who raise their hands so that they can speak?
Yes, I don't see raised hands.
Yeah, Michael has raised his hand. Michael.
Oh. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. So my potential use case is the development of national interoperability repository, which will be connected with European portal, and I would like to have this connected by APIs. So in Poland, we are finishing, this year we'll be finishing the regulation, the legal regulations on this portal. And because the Interoperable Europe Act allows and requires the publication of the official public sector bodies' web pages, the outcomes of the interoperability assessments, the reports on interoperability assessments, we would like to publish our national assessments on our portal, and then to transmit these assessments via API to the European portal. So, so this is one thing from the technical point of view and semantic point of view, the provision of data from the Polish side. The other thing is that we are also modeled on the business level within the draft legislation, the national interoperability assessment. So we would like to reuse the structure and the semantics of the ongoing structure for the data model for the trans-European assessments into the Polish development. So summing up, this year we would like to finish with the legislation and the requirements for the system development, and the next year start building portal which would aims at exchanging data with the European portal. Thanks.
That's something we like to hear. That's our ambitious we want to foster in the community.
So let's stay in touch, and I think that from our side, so from Polish side, we will be happy to contribute to data models or to the API creation. So we will stay in touch.
That's super. Is there anybody else who has their hand raised?
Yeah, so in fact, I saw in the chat that Andrea Moro had a request for a new use case where it would be to search for existing solutions. Now I don't see her. In case while entities looking for a potential solution, would it, for example, search in previous assessments using specific identifiers? I would like to highlight another potential use case that I think is also quite relevant. It's about cascading from higher level legislation to more specific legislation. So to use existing binding, to see how existing binding requirements set in higher level legislation would influence and to help searching through these higher level legislation binding requirements to set up the new legislation, but also cascading from legislation to procurement. Once even the lowest level of legislation has been set, that the technical specification to be set for creating a procurement of a digital public service would rely, and you would be able to see the the picture of all the binding requirements that were set in legislation and which are the ones that are created in the procurement file, so that you have a combined view of all of this.
Okay, that's very interesting. That already highlights to look at connections we haven't been looking at in the data model as is now, because that would mean we have to connect initiatives to other initiatives. So that happens on a higher level. This is really good to bring up at this stage because it opens the door to a different point of view than what the model has been touching on now. Thank you very much, Cecile. Is there anybody else who would like to either voice your comment because you think you might be able to explain it better if you voice it, or who has their hand raised?
I have one more, sorry. Can I make because I did not have a chance to add them to the use cases. I also think that there is a strong potential in checking the user centricity. So looking at which are, and there was also in the chat one point on our citizens, why are not citizens mentioned? I think it's just because the list is not exhaustive, and citizens can be stakeholders, so they would be also here. My point is that I believe that if we can go to a finer grain control vocabulary about stakeholders, then we could really deep dive into user centricity of how this public service, of how this legislation or whatever is built. If you allow to search from a given angle, so from this stakeholder affected, then you can see all the binding requirements and all the barriers existing, etc. So I believe that there should be also a use case around user centricity. But yeah, not sure, but I think it has a potential.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the time and I see that we're coming to an end. We might go a bit over time. My apologies for that. I'll try to keep it brief, but please do keep writing in the chat on your use cases. But my colleague Sander has also shared the GitHub page on which we're developing the data model. Please also voice them there.
Yes, just very quickly, I'll invite you, if you have a GitHub account and you are used to working with GitHub, please, even if you mention the issue today in the chat, please describe it yourself in the issue queue if you can. If not, we'll encode the things mentioned here today in a few days on GitHub to keep track of them. But if you describe your case, I mean, you know better your use case than we do, and that way you're also aware of when people comment on the issue. Otherwise, it might be a bit more difficult to engage on the topic in the future. So that was the invite I wanted to make.
Super. So that touches also on this slide where how would we like you to contribute? So please do share everything you've been typing and talking about now, but also things that you might still come up on the GitHub page. A guideline, it's not necessary that you can follow, is thinking away as a public service provider, I want to be able to do this or that with the data model or the data stored. And this is a guideline. You don't have to stick to this, but it might help you find the right words. We also, after you post your issue, don't just, okay, I provided input, but look at what other people provide. Provide your insights on those issues, on those needs. Vote. Post a little emoji saying thumbs up. I also have this need. We really have to look into it. Why do we need this interaction? Because we might all have a lot of needs, but we can only discuss and incorporate elements in the model that have sufficient traction. So if enough member states are interested, if enough organizations see the value, otherwise we might get a very bloated data model where we in the end are just putting everything we can think of in it, which is also not the intention. So therefore, we will mark use cases that have little traction or no reactions do not be in scope, and they are then in scope of the specific member state to provide the extension to the meta model themselves. If you want to make sure that this doesn't happen, you need to vote and comment on the issues posted. Of course, we're now focusing on use cases at this stage, but if you already had a look at the data model and you already see semantic and technical elements, like Michael did about the unique identifiers, also post them. We are looking at both elements. We are looking at the needs and use cases to build the model around. But if you already want to start building on the model, we can only encourage that. Finally, vote during webinars. So we will be organizing follow-up webinars where we will ask you to vote. And only, again, here to make sure we don't do everything at the same time, only elements that get a majority of the votes, representing a majority of participants and member states, will be considered as valid. In practice, this might mean that only 2 people vote, both positive, but everybody else abstains. We don't see that as a mandate. What we will then do is try to re-engage you in an online discussion to get more fine-grained input and discuss it again during a next webinar. If again there is no uptake or no majority that actually is voting, we will consider it as not being relevant enough. So active participation is the only way that your needs will be properly incorporated. It's just to make sure that we're not shooting blanks everywhere. I have been talking about more webinars and how we're going to develop, etc. Let's make it very concrete. This is the timeline we're going to follow to make sure that we have a data model in June that can be shared with the implementation team. So that touches on the API part. It has been estimated that deployment after the model is finalized will take 3 to 6 months, depending on the severity of the changes. So today we're introducing you to the model, discussing a few use cases as we did. And between today and the 24th of April, we want your input on the use cases. So we want them by the 24th of April. This will allow us to properly incorporate them. If we wait until the next session and they were just posted last minute, we cannot guarantee that they're fully incorporated. So that's why the deadline is the 24th of April to provide your use cases. We know in this period it is Easter holidays for some or for many. So we hope you will be able to find some time between your actual work and the Easter holidays to post your use cases. But the fact that you're already here, I think that's already a good sign to have some enthusiasm on providing this input. Then on the 7th of May, we will be holding our first working session. In this first working session, we will close the use cases, meaning we look at the use cases that are there, we discuss them partially, and we agree these are the use cases we want to meet with the model, and we don't. That's just going to be the scope. We're not going to go beyond, but we're also going to aim to meet those requirements. In preparation of that meeting, we'll already have changed the model partially, and we will keep changing the model in the days to come afterwards. And that brings us to the public review. We really want you to have an in-depth review between the 7th and the 22nd of May to see, are my needs met? Are the needs we agreed on met? We agreed on a scope, but is the scope really met? Yeah. So really very important here to provide your input. That's that public review cycle we were talking about. This is where you can really say, no, stop, we're going in the wrong direction, or yes, this is it, let's go. Depending on that review. If the review is, okay, everything is met, then everybody's happy. But let's be realistic, that might probably not happen because we're a big group. We talk about things and we might mean slightly different things. And that's why we have a planned and blocked date for a second working session on the 5th of June, where we will iterate on the model and everything discussed in the in-depth review. After which, again, we will update some elements, ask for your input online to make sure that on the 30th of June, we have this final session, the final time we will sit together in this development cycle and really say, yes, we agree with this. Let's go forward with what we have achieved now. Let's give this to our development teams and to make sure that what we're giving to our development teams is stable, to make sure that they don't halfway the development get the news, oh, we changed something and have to start over. We want some stability to make sure that our development teams don't get overburdened and are able to deploy what they need to deploy in a timely manner. Then I wanted to briefly touch on some synergies. This action, it's not in a vacuum, it is in a context. So we are reusing elements from the CAMS line of action, which is the Common Assessment Methodology for Standards and Specifications. So they already touch on a common assessment methodology, and we are trying to reuse elements of that that are relevant to us. Of course, we do have to apply some changes because they are focused on standards and specifications. For this, we are looking at their core assessment vocabulary. As you might have noticed in the model, sometimes CAV double point is present. This means we're using from that vocabulary. We also, this is one of the primary focus points, so no surprise there. We are connecting to the portal, but also to the interoperable solutions hosted on the portal. Then one of the things that I'm passionate about that I mentioned before is the connection with catalog of services. So if we already have a catalog of public services, how to connect to make sure this data is annotated properly. Then we come to two initiatives that are running internally at the Commission with a primary focus to serve the Commission, but where we see a high potential for reusability in member states. It's the reporting requirement metadata vocabulary, which does a similar thing to the interoperability assessments, but focuses on reporting requirements. So here, one of the goals that is in scope, I think, is if two pieces of legislation require you at X moment to report on your financial status, the idea is if we have this well modeled and we start to type a requirement that looks like that, a flag will pop up and say, hey, something similar already exists. It says every 3 months, you are saying every 4 months, you're creating a higher burden for reporting. Please do consider aligning. So that's the idea behind it. Then the legal financial digital statement vocabulary, it's a mouthful. It is how the Commission internally plans to address the interoperability assessments, but it goes a bit beyond. So the Commission also wants to touch on other digital aspects and on some legal and financial aspects. So it's integrating the work we are doing here with those other domains. And of course, here again, the question is, are there synergies on your end? Does it connect to something on your end? Please do mention those in the GitHub issues when you're posting a use case to make sure that if we can make things compatible, we want to make things compatible. And with compatible, I mainly mean interoperable, of course. That will be it for today. And there are a few immediate next steps. Please block your agendas. I will show that slide again, but we'll share it with you over email as well. Please block your agendas for those dates because we want you to be involved in discussions. Also, really share your feedback on GitHub, but also always mention your use case. So if you're going to say this needs to change, justify it. Provide the context so we all know what you are talking about and we can build on each other's work. And lastly, please do keep participating in the development cycle, post issues, attend the webinars, talk to each other, propose your solutions. So what do you already have in place that could fit? That's the kind of stuff we want from you. So that closes our webinar. My apologies for going over time, but I would really like to thank you all. And I will now move back to the timeline slide so that you can take a screenshot to know which dates are to be blocked. Sander, do you want to say any closing words?
No, I just want to thank everybody for already providing a lot of helpful comments in the chat, and we'll definitely follow up with an email with the presentation where we will also outline again the procedure on how to raise your use cases and how to vote on other people's use cases in the GitHub issue queue. and that way we can discuss those use cases in the following webinars, and already go have a meaningful discussion in the meanwhile in the issue queue. So because we might also ask for more clarification or just to get a better understanding on how we can evolve the model to fit those use cases. So that being said, I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and we'll see each other soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much for the interesting webinar. Let's stay in touch. See you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.